Hey guys, tonight we begin in the shimmering heat of a Mediterranean afternoon, on a beach so old the sand itself could probably recite ancient poetry. You're in Crete, or at least, what will become Crete, watching a young woman wander along the shore. Her name is Europa, and she's absent-mindedly drawing circles with a reed in the wet sand. She hums a Phoenician lullaby, unaware that a myth is about to crack open around her like an overripe fig. The sea breeze is warm, the sun is just shy of blistering, and your bare feet sink into the golden grain with each sleepy step. In the distance, something shifts. A white speck approaches across the shoreline, rhythmic and oddly elegant. Not a ship. Not a fisherman. No, it's a bull. Not a regular one, though. This creature is absurdly symmetrical. Its horns curve like polished ivory. Its hide gleams as if buffed with celestial wax. It looks, if you're being honest, like a bull that's been airbrushed for a godly magazine cover. And here's your first little reality check. This girl, Europa? She's not going to just pet the bull and walk away. Nope. She's going to end up on its back, crossing entire oceans. You probably won't survive this if you're hoping for a story that makes logical sense. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The bull is standing very still now, just at the water's edge. Europa pauses, blinking in the sun. You watch her slowly approach it. She's used to animals. Her father owns purple dye factories and trade ships, not farms, but the palace is full of ceremonial creatures. Still, this one feels different. When she reaches out and places a tentative hand on its flank, the bull doesn't flinch. Its eyes are oddly intelligent, and you could swear, if you weren't already half asleep, that it's trying not to smirk. Back in Olympus, meanwhile, Zeus is congratulating himself. This isn't the first time he's turned himself into something ridiculous for a girl. There was the swan thing. The golden shower incident. The whole eagle kidnapping bit. But something about this one feels breezier. He's nailed the entrance, at least. Beach. Bull. Pretty girl. Check, check, and check. You sit beside Europa as she kneels beside the creature. Her fingers brush its nose. It makes a low, humming sound, not quite a moo, more like a rumble of satisfaction. The kind of noise a very smug god might make if he thought he was being clever. Historians still argue whether this entire scene symbolizes trade, conquest, or just a creepy celestial pickup line. But for now, you only see a girl and a bull, framed by salt-blown cliffs and a sea that stretches into forever. The wind carries scents of seaweed and citrus groves. Seagulls argue overhead, but even they keep a suspicious distance from this bull. It lies down slowly in the sand, as if inviting Europa to climb on its back. And because she is either incredibly trusting or already under some light divine hypnosis, she does exactly that. You climb up behind her, your hands gripping the creature's silky fur. The texture is unnervingly warm, almost pulsing. You glance at Europa. She's laughing nervously, brushing her hair from her eyes as the bull rises. And then, without warning, it charges. Not into the forest. Not toward the city. But straight into the sea. The water crashes around you. You're instantly soaked, clinging for dear life. The bull gallops forward as if the ocean floor is a cobbled road, its hooves making no splash, only spirals of sea foam. Europa yells in surprise, but not in fear. She laughs. She's probably never felt this wild and free. Meanwhile, you are extremely aware that you are astride a mythological god in the form of livestock, surrounded by salt water and ancient symbolism, and your sandals are floating away. That's when it hits you. This isn't just a romantic escape. This is an abduction. A seduction. A divine art project gone deeply off-script. In Crete, centuries later, poets and painters will try to immortalize this moment. Some will show Europa clinging to the bull's neck, her robes fluttering like sails. Others will depict her looking serene, as if being stolen by a celestial farm animal is the height of luxury. But you You just tried to keep your balance. A mainstream historical fact: the myth of Europa is one of the oldest surviving Greek stories, predating even the Homeric epics. It was told and retold across cultures, blending Phoenician and Hellenic elements into something shimmering and ambiguous. The name, Europa, may have even referred to the broad face of the earth or the western lands across the Aegean. No one's quite sure. Fringe tidbit? Some later scholars actually argued that Zeus wasn't transforming at all, that Europa was hallucinating from sacred herbs given by priestesses of Astarte. Others suggest the bull wasn't a god, but a sacred rite, Europa enacting a fertility ritual on Crete's sacred animal. Yes, that's just the kind of mythic overthink that sends historians into gentle debates at wine-scented conferences. The bull surges forward, waves parting around its chest. Europa grips its horns now. Her hair streams behind her like ink in water. You steal a glance at her expression. She's not screaming. She's curious. Thrilled. Slightly terrified, but not in the way you expected. Far behind you, the coast of Phoenicia fades into watercolor haze. Ahead, islands rise from the sea, some volcanic, some shimmering with mist. Birds wheel overhead. Dolphins surface, trailing your wake like gleeful escorts. You catch sight of a sea turtle the size of a rowboat. Europa leans forward to whisper something to the bull. You don't catch it, but the bull rumbles in response, and you swear you see lightning flash just under the surface of its hide. As the sun begins to drop toward the western horizon, the bull shows no sign of slowing. You've left the familiar behind. The story is underway now. No turning back. The waves stretch endlessly ahead, and the bull doesn't tire. Its movements are fluid, rhythmic, as if the ocean itself is clearing a path beneath it. Europa clings tightly, the salt wind combing through her hair. You're still behind her, awkwardly balancing on Zeus's shoulder blades, which is a sentence you never imagined saying until now. Time gets weird out here. Maybe it's the divine pace of the bull's swim run, or the sun melting like butter into the horizon, but your internal clock goes soft. Hours might pass. Maybe days. Europa stops asking questions and just stares out at the glowing sea. Up in Olympus, Zeus is probably feeling smug beyond belief. And if you peek behind the curtain of myth, it makes a bizarre kind of sense. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was Zeus choosing someone. Selecting, really? Like a cosmic dating app swiped right, with special effects. Because back in his shiny palace in the clouds, Zeus had no shortage of romantic options. Goddesses. Nymphs. Even mortals who were just trying to mind their business. But Europa? She stood out. Royal, yes, but also curious. Observant. Clever. And let's not forget, Phoenician. That meant she came from a long line of seafarers, traders, and thinkers. Her people dyed fabrics with the secretions of snails and turned it into something empires would kill for. Zeus noticed. Of all the mortals, she shimmered with something halfway between royalty and mystery. So yes, you're floating across the Mediterranean because Zeus, king of the sky and serial transformer, decided she was interesting. Of course, his methods were unconventional. You know, the whole turn into a bull and yeet her into the sea thing. But this is far from the first time Zeus has gotten dramatic in the name of romance. You remember Io? She was minding her priestess business when Zeus seduced her and then turned her into a cow to hide her from Hera. Real original, right? Spoiler: Hera figured it out and sent a gadfly to chase poor Io across half the known world. And then there's Leda, seduced in the form of a swan. Danae? He entered her locked chamber as Golden Rain, which honestly feels more like a plumbing problem than foreplay. In comparison, Europa's bull seems almost normal. Historians still argue whether Zeus's frequent shape-shifting reflects ancient fertility rituals, astronomical allegories, or just mythmakers having a little too much wine. You bounce along on Zeus's back, thinking about how myth is just history wearing a party mask. And in that party, Zeus is definitely the guy who drinks too much ambrosia and starts showing off. Europa shifts slightly in front of you, her voice carried backward by the wind. Do you think it's magic? You answer with a non-committal grunt. What are you supposed to say? Yes, you're currently riding the king of the gods disguised as a livestock model. Instead, you look around. A small island appears on the horizon. It's little more than a pile of rocks with a few scrubby trees clinging to it. The bull veers toward it. You land with a soft, sandy thud. The island smells of sunbaked salt and old moss. Europa slips off first, her legs shaky from the journey. You follow, knees wobbling like overcooked noodles. The bull doesn't follow. It watches from the water, chest deep, horns gleaming. You lock eyes with it, and for a heartbeat you see him. Zeus. Not the animal. Not the disguise. Just a flicker of divinity. Eyes older than oceans. A grin that probably started wars. Then he blinks, and it's gone. Europa explores the island. She finds a clutch of seabirds nesting on a rocky ledge. Plucks a sprig of something herbaceous from the cliffside. You trail after her, noting the odd silence. No insects. No breeze. Just the lazy crashing of waves and the soft shifting of feathers. She sits. You sit. The bull waits. A mainstream historical fact floats into your sleepy brain. The Greeks didn't invent these myths in isolation. They absorbed stories from Mesopotamia, Egypt, and especially the Phoenicians, Europa's people. In fact, some scholars believe the bull of the myth might trace back to older, Near Eastern fertility symbols. The bull wasn't just Zeus being dramatic, it was a sacred creature, linked to storms, strength, and seasonal renewal. But here's the quirky bit. This entire episode may also have been inspired by geography. From the eastern Mediterranean, if you follow the setting sun, you'll eventually reach Crete. The land of bulls, labyrinths, and mysterious palaces. Some scholars believe Europa's abduction is a poetic retelling of Phoenician migration or trade contact with Minoan Crete. Less love story, more cultural merger disguised as divine drama. Historians still argue whether this tale is romance, allegory, or PR campaign for the ancient sea trade. But Europa doesn't seem to care. She lies back on a patch of warm grass, staring up at the sky. You flop beside her, eyes heavy. The bull watches. You don't know how long you rest. Maybe hours. Maybe just the span of a sigh. When you rise again, the bull is at the shore, waiting. It lowers its head gently, as if offering a lift. Europa climbs on again, and so do you, wet, weary, but now a little more curious. The sea stretches before you again, but this time you feel a shift. The pace is slower. The mood softer. The bull moves not with urgency now, but with ceremony. Like it's not just crossing water, it's crossing into story. And you are going with it, whether you understand it or not. The moon rises behind you, glowing and full. Europa hums again, a low Phoenician tune, and the sea hums back. Somewhere far away, someone's going to turn this into a tapestry. Or a statue. Or a continent. But right now, it's just a girl on a bull, and you behind her, drifting towards something mythic. You open your eyes to sunrise. The sky is peach and lavender, clouds stretch like gauze across the edges of the horizon. The bull is still moving, slow now, coasting along shallow waters where the seafloor glimmers with broken pottery and pale sand. You blink and shake off the dream fuzz. The sea is glass smooth. Europa sits ahead of you, spine straight, hair tangled by salt and wind. She's staring toward the land up ahead. It's not Crete yet. Not even close. But the shape of this journey, the rhythm of it, it's taking you there in pieces. You don't quite know the destination, but you can sense that something has already changed. And so, as the bull continues swimming lazily, let's rewind just a little, to Europa's life before all this God-Boloshan nonsense began. You close your eyes and drift back to Tyre. Tyre, the bustling Phoenician city, full of sandstone towers and harbors clinking with bronze. The air smells like brine, ink, and roasted barley. Streets buzz with merchants shouting in 6 languages, their robes stained purple from the city's famous dye. You dodge a fish cart, duck under a rope strung with squid, and find Europa in the palace courtyard, practicing her lyre. She's royal, yes, but not insulated. Her brothers race through the halls with wooden swords. Her father, King Agenor, sits in the audience chamber swearing at trade ledgers. And Europa? She's the curious one. The thoughtful one. The kind of girl who gets distracted halfway through embroidery because she spotted a hawk's shadow glide across the mosaic floor. Today, though, she's restless. She's already finished her lessons. She's brushed her hair, trimmed the end of a scroll, and written her name 3 times in stylized Phoenician script. Now she's pacing. You follow her through colonnades and gardens, past statues of Baal and Melkart. She pauses beside a shrine, just a small one, carved from limestone, with incense wafting in the sun. Her fingers trail along the engraved bull horns at its base. And here's a historical fact for your sleepy mind. In Phoenician religion, bulls weren't just animals. They were symbols of divinity. Associated with Baal, the storm god, and Melkart, the city's protector. Shrines to these horned deities line the coast, their horns often painted red with ochre or set with bronze tips. A bull wasn't just a symbol of strength. It was divine presence, sky power, and masculine fertility all rolled into one very muscular package. You trail Europa down to the dye vats, huge stone cisterns filled with thousands of rotting murex snails. The smell is unforgettable. But she doesn't flinch. She lifts a shell, taps it, inspects the purple stain on her fingertip. This color, royal purple, is the lifeblood of Tyre. It stains her tunics. It marks her lineage. Fringe tidbit? The murex dye process was so stinky and complex that ancient Phoenicians kept it guarded like state secrets. It took thousands of snails to make a single ounce of dye. There are records, long after Europa's time, of Roman senators wearing togas dyed with murex so potent they shimmered like beetle shells. And people would literally lean closer to smell the garments to confirm their authenticity. Europa's father, meanwhile, is preparing ships. Not for war, but for trade. Cedar logs from the mountains, glass from Sidon, purple cloth from Tyre, they'll sail across the known world. And Europa watches the preparations with a glint in her eye. Not because she wants to run away, but because she's already imagining what's out there. What islands might lie past the boundary of maps. Her brothers are less poetic. Cadmus, the eldest, is all duty and muscle. He'll one day become a legend himself, founding Thebes and sewing dragon teeth into warriors. But right now, he's just a boy throwing a fig at Europa's head. You duck instinctively, even though the fig never hits you. It splats against a column, and Europa rolls her eyes. Her days are full, lessons, ceremonies, perfumed baths, but you sense her restlessness. There's something about her gaze, always scanning the sea, like she knows something's coming. Not just ships, but something. Historians still argue whether Europa was a real person, perhaps a princess later mythologized, or a symbolic stand-in for trade, territory, or religious transition. Was she an archetype? A real Phoenician girl swallowed by Greek imagination? Or just a convenient love interest retrofitted for a bull-themed origin story? She wouldn't have known, of course. All she knew was that the city was too loud today. So she slipped away from the palace, past the harbor, past the dye workers, and wandered alone toward the shore. You're back with her now, on that fateful day. The beach is quiet. The tide whispers. She leaves behind a trail of sandal prints. And just as she reaches the edge of the water, the bull appears. But now, because you've seen her daily life, her curiosity, her intelligence, her frustration, you understand just how strange this moment must have felt. She wasn't some airhead myth girl flattered by a shiny animal. She was a thinker. A dreamer. A girl too clever to be easily fooled. And yet, she climbed on. You begin to wonder if it wasn't entirely Zeus's idea. Because maybe, just maybe, Europa wanted to go. Not because she knew the bull was a god. Not because she wanted an adventure. But because something inside her whispered that the beach wasn't enough. That the purple dye and the scrolls and the palace couldn't contain her. The bull doesn't coerce. He waits. And when she climbs on, she does it calmly. Thoughtfully. You drift again. The sea laps at the bull's flanks, The air grows warm. Somewhere ahead, Crete is beginning to form itself, mountains rising like sleepy giants, olive groves stretching toward the shore. Europa leans her cheek against the bull's neck, and for the first time, she closes her eyes. The wind shifts slightly, cooler now, touched with the scent of open sea. The bull's pace has changed too. It's no longer galloping forward like some divine speedboat, but gliding. Leisurely. Almost romantic. As if Zeus has decided there's no rush, that the longer this goes on, the better. You sit behind Europa, the sea foaming quietly beneath you, and try to process what's even happening. She, meanwhile, seems entirely unfazed. She's gone from skepticism to curiosity to, well, not relaxation, but something close. Like she's finally stopped trying to understand the moment, and has decided to ride it out, literally. The bull turns its head slightly, almost as if checking to see if you're still back there. Its eyes glint, a strange, electric kind of gold. Zeus is clearly enjoying himself. He's made a fine entrance, and now he's pulling out all the stops in what might be the most ridiculous godly courtship in Greek mythology. You glance at Europa again. She's draped across the bull's back, her arms relaxed along its shoulders. Her hair trails behind her like seaweed in a tide. And then she does something unexpected. She talks to him. "You're not just a bull," she says quietly, as if to herself. "I'm not that stupid." The bull snorts gently. She sits up straighter. "I knew it the moment you stopped to let me climb on. No normal bull would do that. Or cross the sea. Or look at me like it was waiting for me to decide." You shift slightly. She hasn't acknowledged you yet, but you're not surprised. The tension here is thick enough to spread on bread. "I'm not afraid of you," she tells the bull. "But you'd better not disappoint me." And that, right there, is the moment Zeus probably fell head over hooves for her. Not when she giggled at his charm. Not when she marveled at his power. But when she challenged him. Gave him the verbal equivalent of a side eye and told him she expected better. Historians still argue whether Europa had any choice in this encounter, whether she was truly seduced, gently tricked, or outright stolen. But here in this version, she seems perfectly aware of the stakes. She might not know what Zeus wants yet, but she knows who she is. You continue drifting. The sun rises higher. Far off, dolphins leap and vanish again. The bull hums, yes, hums, a deep resonant vibration that makes the water pulse around you like a quiet drumbeat. It's getting weird now. Europa reaches forward and strokes the bull's neck. "So," she says casually, "what's the plan?" The bull doesn't answer, obviously. But he does turn slightly northward, heading towards something neither of you can see yet. Now would be a good time to talk about just how unbullish this bull actually is. The body is technically correct, horns, hooves, tail, but nothing about it feels real. The fur is too clean. The eyes are too expressive. And it moves more like a dream of a bull than a living creature. No sweating. No heaving. No awkward snorts or barnyard behavior. It's like someone took all the appealing parts of bullness and photoshopped the rest. Fringe tidbit. In some ancient art, Zeus as bull is shown with little wings, or even a wreath of stars around his horns. Because why not? If you're going to transform into a farm animal to seduce someone, might as well go full celestial accessory mode. Europa shifts again. "Do you do this often?" You nearly choke on a splash of seawater. She knows. The bull flicks one ear. A wave crashes gently to the right, and a flying fish skims past your foot. You lean forward slightly curious. "What do you mean?" Europa shrugs without looking back. "He's a god. They always do this. Test us. Trick us. See if we'll follow. It's their idea of fun." You nod slowly. She's not wrong. Greek myths are full of tests. And often, they come disguised in the most absurd packaging. Remember that time Athena disguised herself as an old woman just to see if a mortal would gossip about her? Or when Poseidon gave Odysseus a 10-year detour over one tiny act of pride? Yeah. The gods were basically ancient reality show producers, always watching, always judging, rarely fair. But this has the makings of something more personal. The bull slows again. You're nearing another small island, a crescent of white sand, fringed with olive trees. Birds flutter from branch to branch, chirping wildly. The bull walks straight up onto the beach, water sluicing off its flanks in sheets. Europa slides down, landing with a graceful plop in the sand. You follow, feeling 10 pounds heavier with seawater. The bull shakes itself once, glittering droplets fly everywhere, and then kneels. Not dramatically. Not like a proud beast. More like a gentleman offering a seat. It's absurd. Europa smirks. You can drop the act any time. The bull doesn't move. You walk with her up the beach. The sand is soft, warm, and filled with tiny spiral shells. Birds coo in the trees. The light has shifted again, drowsy, golden, with that particular stillness that only happens when you're far from cities and questions. Europa sits beneath an olive tree. You join her. She plucks a branch, studies the silver-green leaves. Do you think he's just lonely? She asks. It's a fair question. For all his power, Zeus does seem strangely desperate sometimes. Like he wants connection but doesn't know how to do it without causing a spectacle. Like a kid with a crush who keeps showing off instead of saying how he feels. Mainstream historical fact. The Greeks worshipped Zeus as both king and protector, but also feared him deeply. He was the one who threw lightning, toppled oaths, punished arrogance. But he was also the one who oversaw xenia, hospitality. He could be kind, generous, even loving. Just, not consistently. Europa lies back and stares at the leaves. I hope he knows this isn't going to be easy. You don't know if she's talking about herself or about Zeus. The bull waits by the shoreline. Watching. Always watching. As the sky shifts toward late afternoon, you sense that this island stop was more than a break. It was a moment for Europa to consider. To measure. To choose whether to keep going. And she does. As the sun dips again, she walks calmly to the bull, climbs back onto his back, and waits for you to join her. This time, there's no hesitation. You both know exactly what you're doing. And still, the bull does not speak. He just turns west. Toward destiny. Toward Crete. Toward the next part of this strange, salt-soaked love story. You feel it before you see it, a tightening in the air, a pressure just behind your eyes, like the world is holding its breath. The sky darkens slightly, but there are no clouds. The water flattens out, smooth as molten glass. Even the breeze forgets to blow. Something's about to happen. Europa shifts on the bull's back, her body tense. She doesn't speak. Neither do you. The silence isn't peaceful anymore. It's charged. The bull slows to a halt in the water. Then it lowers itself until you and Europa are only ankle-deep in a tidal shallows dotted with sea grass and curling conches. You hop off first, legs numb and wobbly, and wait around to help Europa down. But she doesn't take your hand. She slides off on her own, landing in the water with a soft splash. Her face is set. Her gaze is on the bull. He's changed. It's subtle at first. The way his shoulders seem broader. The faint glow rising from beneath his skin. The sudden knowledge, unspoken but undeniable, that you're no longer looking at an animal. And then it happens. The transformation is quiet, but seismic. The bull stands upright. Limbs elongate. Fur smooths into skin. Horns retract like a memory. And standing there, dripping with seawater and radiant as a storm cloud caught in a sunbeam, is Zeus. You take an involuntary step back. He doesn't look like a thunder-hurling tyrant, or an all-powerful deity. Not right now. He looks like a man sculpted out of stories and sky. His eyes are fierce and distant, like stars that learn to stare. Europa crosses her arms. Finally! Zeus chuckles. I thought it best not to overwhelm you. Too late for that. You can't help but admire her poise. Most people would either faint or propose marriage. Europa stands like someone who's just been given the answer to a riddle she never agreed to solve. Zeus steps forward. You were never meant to be ordinary, he says gently. I saw you long before the bull ever found your shore. And here's where it gets complicated. Consent, in Greek myth, is a slippery eel of a concept. This moment, this transformation, is often depicted as the turning point, where Europa either falls for Zeus's charm or realizes she's been taken. But interpretations vary wildly. Historians still argue whether Europa was a willing lover, a symbolic fertility figure, or a tragic abductee. Some myths say she welcomed Zeus. Others say she tried to flee. Some later accounts even suggest she was honored by gods and mortals alike. But the truth, as always, is a foggy shoreline. Europa's expression is unreadable. She walks past Zeus and sits on a nearby rock, her wet tunic clinging to her knees. You follow wary. Zeus doesn't sit. He stands in the shallows, framed by sunlight. I offer you a place beside me, he says. Not in Olympus, but in Crete. A home where you'll be revered. Children of divine blood. A legacy. Europa raises one eyebrow. You think I want children? Eventually, he replies without missing a beat. 3 sons. Each destined for greatness. You squint. That's weirdly specific. He steps closer. Minos will rule Crete. Rhadamanthus will be a just king. Sarpedon will fall in war, but his name will echo through legend. I've seen it. Europa doesn't respond. She stares out at the horizon. Do I have a choice? She asks at last. Zeus hesitates. That one beat of silence says more than any divine speech could. That's the thing about gods. They offer gifts with one hand and take autonomy with the other. Fringe tidbit? Some versions of this story say Europa was enchanted, literally bewitched into trust. Others claim Aphrodite herself helped orchestrate the union, ensuring the power of love overwhelmed any fear. Still others, much later, in Roman retellings, clean the whole thing up and call it a union of fate, which is mythological PR speak for. Don't look too closely. You sit beside Europa and watch her chew on her lip. The water shimmers. Time seems to loop. She finally stands. Walks to Zeus. Looks him straight in the eye. I'll go with you, she says. But I do it with eyes open. Zeus inclines his head. For a second, something like respect flickers across his face. Not conquest. Not victory. But the briefest acknowledgement that this woman, mortal though she may be, is his equal in spirit. The silence that follows feels less loaded. A little more human. You notice the landscape has changed again. Trees lean closer. The wind returns. The tension has bled from the sky. And in its place, direction. Momentum. Zeus doesn't resume his bull form. Not this time. He simply gestures, and a path opens in the sea, stone steps rising from the depths, dry and glistening, leading toward the distant shore. You and Europa exchange glances. Then you both start walking. Zeus follows, not leading this time, but simply present. As you walk, the sea shifts beneath the steps. Fish dart below. A sea turtle paddles past, ancient and unbothered. The path is long, but not difficult. You pass an island with white columns, ruins, or maybe temples in progress. Distant music floats across the water. You hear flutes. Laughter. Bells. A mainstream historical fact hums in the back of your mind. Ancient Crete, home of the Minoans, was one of the most advanced Bronze Age civilizations. Palaces like Knossos boasted plumbing, frescoes, and intricate trade networks. Some scholars even think the real-life Minoans were the inspiration behind Atlantis myths. Their culture worshipped bulls, performed labyrinthine rituals, and left behind artwork teeming with sea motifs and flowing dancers. And that's where you're headed. Europa's steps are steady. She doesn't flinch, doesn't hesitate. She's no longer just a girl who followed a bull. She's becoming a figure in her own right. A bridge between peoples. A human myth in the making. Zeus walks behind her. Not speaking. For once, perhaps even he is aware that the spotlight has shifted. As you near the final stretch of the path, the sun dips lower in the sky. The island ahead is huge now, mountainous, green, alive. Crete. The sea laps against the stone. The wind tugs at your clothes. Europa lifts her chin. And the god, the bull, the trickster, the lover, he follows her into the next act of the story. Crete rises in front of you, huge and sun-drenched, its mountains outlined in blue haze and its hills stitched with olive groves. The sea path you've been walking on, those smooth, impossible stones summoned from nowhere, fades beneath the water just as your feet touch dry land. No fanfare. No thunderclap. Just a soft, satisfied sigh from the ocean, as if even it understands that the moment has passed. Europa doesn't pause. She walks forward as though the entire island has been waiting for her, and maybe it has. You follow, feet squishing in your still damp sandals. Behind you, Zeus lingers at the water's edge, looking less like a thunder god and more like a man who's just realized that step one of his ridiculous plan actually worked. The landscape changes as you move inland. The coastal rocks give way to soft, golden soil. Bees hum. Cypress trees sway. You pass through vineyards that smell of ripening fruit and through fields littered with wild poppies. The air is full of the sweet ache of summer. Zeus eventually catches up, walking beside Europa but not touching her. She doesn't speak to him. Not out of defiance, necessarily, but because she's too busy watching the land unfold in front of her like a prophecy written in green. And now begins what can only be described as the ancient Greek version of a new life montage. Picture it, Europa being led through the low gates of a sunlit city nestled in the hills. People parting to stare. Old women whispering. Children pointing. Someone gasps. "Is that a princess?" And someone else mutters. "She's riding with him?" Because Zeus, still radiating that whole divine bachelor vibe, hasn't gone full incognito. He's visibly something. And everyone knows something mythic is happening. You trail behind, as usual, watching history write itself in olive branches and sandals. Zeus leads Europa to a palace. Not the marble and pillars kind we often imagine, but something older, stranger. A complex of layered terraces, painted columns, and courtyards teeming with birds. There are dolphins on the walls, griffins too, and labyrinthine hallways that seem to shift slightly when you're not looking. Mainstream historical fact? This is based on real stuff. The Palace of Knossos, excavated in the early 20th century, revealed multi-story buildings, ceremonial centers, and plumbing systems advanced enough to make Roman engineers do a double take. Some historians believe it was less of a royal residence and more of a temple complex, with women in positions of religious power, and frescoes celebrating rituals tied to bulls, the sea, and seasonal renewal. Europa walks through it like she belongs. She's not impressed by the size or the wealth, she's measuring the energy. The people bow. The servants scurry. A white cow moos in the distance, possibly confused about why a god was impersonating one of its cousins. At some point, Europa disappears into the interior chambers. You don't follow. Instead, you drift through the halls, running your hand along walls painted with spirals and birds, octopuses, and swirling waves. It feels alive, like the building itself is breathing. Somewhere, someone starts playing a lyre, soft and hesitant. And then Zeus is beside you. "She'll be well cared for," he says quietly. "Worshipped even. Crete will remember her." You nod. But you also squint at him. "Is that what she wants?" He doesn't answer. Not really his thing. That night there's a feast in the palace's central courtyard. Torches flicker. Tables groan under platters of roasted lamb, figs, olives, and honey-drenched pastries. The wine flows freely, too freely, if the way Zeus is laughing with a minotaur-shaped cup in his hand is any indication. Europa sits on a carved wooden throne at the head of the table. Not next to Zeus, above him. Elevated. Symbolic. The locals are already calling her the Lady of the Island, and someone hands her a laurel crown made of woven silver leaves. She accepts it, but her eyes are far away. Fringe tidbit? Some scholars believe Europa may have been fused with earlier Cretan goddess figures, like Potnia, the mistress of animals, or even linked to pre-Greek earth deities. That would explain the sudden reverence. She wasn't just a visitor. She slotted into a mythic role already waiting for her, like a key fitting a door carved centuries before. Later, after the food, the music, and the slightly overenthusiastic flame juggler, you slip away from the noise. You find Europa on a balcony overlooking the sea. She's barefoot, her feet curled around the stone ledge, and she's eating a pomegranate seed one at a time. Not what you expected? You ask. She shrugs. I didn't expect anything. But it's not bad. The wind rustles her hair. You sit beside her. You're a queen now. A consort of Zeus. Your name's going to be carved into coins, into poems, into moons. People will name continents after you. She snorts. How flattering. I get a name, he gets to go home to Olympus. And there it is, the central tension. Because Zeus isn't staying. You both know that. Gods don't do long-term. He's here for the spectacle, the children, the myth. And then he'll vanish in a storm cloud, leaving stories and statues in his wake. Historians still argue whether Zeus abandoned Europa immediately or stayed just long enough to establish her sons. Some say he left guardians for her, gifts of protection. Others believe he left because she no longer needed him. You watch her finish the pomegranate. She flicks a seed into the dark. I'm not afraid of being alone, she says. I just don't want to be forgotten. You're about to answer when the bull returns. Not Zeus this time, just a real one. Grazing in the courtyard below. But for a second, your heart skips. Because stories have a way of looping in on themselves. You leave her there, silhouetted against the stars, the sea whispering promises below. And behind you, the palace hums with music and firelight. Crete has accepted her. The myth is unfolding. And you? You're still somewhere in the middle of it. The next morning, you wake to birdsong and the low murmur of distant surf. The palace is quiet, too quiet for a place that held a godly feast only hours before. You walk through sun-drenched courtyards where petals scatter across the stone like confetti after a forgotten celebration. Olive trees sway gently, casting shadows shaped like ancient runes. You find Europa by a shallow pool, her toes dangling in the water. Her face is calm, but there's a certain tightness around the eyes. Like she's waiting for something to begin, or maybe, for something to end. She doesn't look at you when she speaks. I had a dream, she murmurs, of a man made of bronze. He stood on the edge of the sea and pounded his fists on the sand. He said he was a gift. You raise an eyebrow. Dreams in Greek myth are never just dreams. She dips her hand into the pool and watches the ripples. He said his name was Talos. You nod slowly. Of course. Zeus doesn't do subtle, and he certainly doesn't do clean exits. If he's going to disappear from a relationship, which, let's face it, is his favorite move, he leaves behind divine trinkets. And Talos is no ordinary keepsake. Within an hour you hear it. The distant clang of metal on rock. You and Europa hurry to the cliff's edge overlooking the coast, and there he is, Talos, a gleaming bronze giant, patrolling the shores of Crete. He's enormous, maybe 30 feet tall, striding in slow, deliberate loops around the island's perimeter. His joints grind faintly with each step. A faint trail of steam rises from the single vein that winds around his body, sealed shut by a bronze nail at his ankle. Mainstream historical fact: Talos is considered by some scholars to be one of the earliest depictions of a robot or automaton in myth. The Greeks didn't have machines like that, obviously, but they imagined them. Moving statues, self-operating tripods, bronze guardians animated by divine fire. Hephaestus, god of metalwork, was the supposed maker of Talos, and whether it was magic or mechanics, the result is the same. Crete now has a one-man security system. Europa stares, arms folded. So, I get a guard dog? You laugh. More like a guard colossus. Talos stops briefly and turns toward the palace, eyes glowing faintly. He bows, yes, bows, to Europa, and then resumes his steady march. Around the island. Over and over. Europa shakes her head. That's flattering. But weird. Weird indeed. And Talos isn't the only gift. Later that day, a man arrives at the palace with a large wooden cage, inside a dog. But not just any dog. Sleek, golden, and absolutely vibrating with energy. The man bows, explains that this hound, Leylaps, is a gift from the gods. A creature that never fails to catch its prey. Fringe tidbit? Leylaps is famous in myth not just for its skills, but for being part of one of those wonderfully paradoxical Greek tales. Leylaps was once set to chase a magical fox that could never be caught. An unstoppable hunter versus an uncatchable prey. The paradox was so ridiculous that Zeus, in a rare moment of philosophical exhaustion, turned both into stone. Europa kneels by the cage. Leylaps sniffs her hand, then licks it. When she opens the gate, he bursts forth in a golden blur, does 3 perfect loops around the courtyard, and then sits neatly by her feet like he's been waiting his whole life for her. Zeus may be gone, but his fingerprints are everywhere. By dusk, the palace is buzzing. Servants whisper about omens. Priests light incense and interpret the patterns of Leylaps' tail flicks. Farmers leave offerings near the sea, where Talos passes like a mechanical tide. And Europa? She's silent. You follow her to the upper terraces, where the sea is pink and silver under the setting sun. He left me a bodyguard, a dog, and a palace. She says flatly. No note. No goodbye. You shrug. In fairness, he also left you alone. Which might be the kindest thing Zeus has ever done. She laughs, unexpectedly. A dry, sharp laugh. That's true. She leans on the parapet and watches Talos pass in the distance, his shadow long and wavering on the hills. It's not a bad place. The people are kind. The food is good. The air smells like pine and fig. She trails off. You wait. I thought it would feel more magical, being part of a myth. But it still feels like just me. And there it is, that moment you've been waiting for. When the story slows. When the glow wears off. When the immortal gives you gifts, and then flies away on a cloud, and you're left with a talking dog and a walking bronze man and an uncomfortable amount of influence. Historians still argue whether the tale of Europa is a cautionary one or an aspirational one. Is it about female agency, divine interference, the blending of cultures? Is Europa an origin figure, a pawn, or a power in her own right? Even ancient Greek writers couldn't quite agree. Some made her passive. Others gave her sharp opinions. Some turned her into a goddess, others a footnote. You stay with her until the stars rise. She watches Leylaps play in the moonlight. Talos' footsteps echo faintly in the distance, like a heartbeat that never stops. And finally Europa whispers, I'm not going to be forgotten. It's not a question. It's a vow. Later that night, you dream of bronze limbs striding endlessly across sand. Of eyes that glow like embers. Of a girl who became legend because she refused to be just one thing. The gifts remain. The god does not. And that's how the next chapter begins. The sun creeps over the mountains with a quiet authority, warming the stone walls of the palace and sending soft light across the rippling sea. You wake slowly, tangled in linen and dreams of labyrinths and bronze giants. Somewhere in the courtyard below, Leylaps lets out a single sharp bark, already chasing something, as if the day has a head start on you. Europa is already awake. Of course she is. She's in the palace's open hall, seated beside a large, carved wooden cradle. Inside it, a swaddled infant. Her first son. You watch as she rocks it gently, humming a lullaby that probably dates back to her own childhood in Tyre. But this is Crete now. She hums with one foot in two worlds. His name is Minos. She says quietly, not looking up. You nod because you've heard that name before, so many times. In stories, in ruins, in dusty textbooks and marble inscriptions. This tiny bundle in her arms will grow into that Minos. King of Crete. Judge of the underworld. Labyrinth commissioner and minotaur enabler. But right now, he's just a wriggling baby, sneezing softly and making goat-like bleats. Europa is calm, but you sense the gravity of the moment. The myth has taken root in her body. There's no turning back now. She's a mother, and not just to a future king, but to an entire symbolic dynasty. 2 more sons follow not long after, Rhadamanthus and Sarpedon. You help the nurses carry linens and water basins. You wiped sweat from Europa's brow during one long, silent night when thunder echoed far offshore and she refused to let anyone else near her. These are not the dramatic scenes the poets will remember, but they're real. They're what actually build legends. Mainstream historical fact: the name Midas likely wasn't just a name, but a title. Sort of like Pharaoh or Caesar. The kings of Crete may all have been called Minos, one after the other, each adding to the myth until the line between the man and the role dissolved. The historical Minos, if there was one, was likely a ruler of an early Minoan city-state, but later writers turned him into something greater, a lawgiver, a bridge between mortal and divine justice. And he's learning to crawl right now in front of your feet, drooling on a ceremonial rug. Rhadamanthus is quiet, thoughtful. His gaze is always locked on people's mouths, as if trying to catch them in a lie. Sarpedon, by contrast, is chaos in human form, grabbing everything, climbing furniture before he can walk. Even Laelaps, the perfect dog, is slightly terrified of him. Europa juggles all of it. The crying, the rituals, the political expectations. Local nobles from all corners of the island come bearing gifts: copper, figs, carved figurines. Some call her Lady of the Bulls, others Goddess Mother. No one seems entirely sure if she's divine or not, and she doesn't clarify. She lets the mystery hang there like incense. Zeus? Still gone. Not even a thundercloud postcard. But his absence seems to give Europa room to shape things her way. She starts sitting in on councils. Her judgments are quick, sharp, fair. When a dispute arises between 2 farmers over whose goat chewed which olive tree, she listens, then orders both men to walk home barefoot, through opposite groves. The goat will follow the one it loves, she says. It does. Whispers begin. Not about Zeus anymore, but about her. One evening, she climbs a hill behind the palace. You follow, carrying wine and bread. She stands at the top and looks down at the sprawling complex of Crete, the white buildings, the grapevines, the curling smoke from cooking fires. I dreamed of a labyrinth, she says quietly. You nod. With a monster? She smirks. Not yet. Just the walls. The endless paths. She's quiet for a while. Then, Minos will build it. Or order it built. They'll say he was wise. They'll say he had divine justice. But they'll forget he came from me. Her voice isn't bitter. Just clear. Historians still argue whether Minos was a tyrant or a lawgiver. Some ancient authors describe him as cruel, demanding human sacrifices. Others call him wise and fair, so respected that after death he became one of the 3 judges of Hades. But in every version, he is central. Immovable. A figure around whom mythology orbits like a moon. You look down at the palace again. At the children chasing Laelaps through the courtyard. At Talos, still walking the perimeter like a ticking clock in bronze boots. Fringe tidbit? Later myths say that Minos learned the law directly from Zeus, who dictated rules to him in a secret cave. Another version claims that Minos tricked Poseidon, refusing to sacrifice a sacred bull sent from the sea, and was punished when his wife, Pasiphae, fell in love with the beast. And that union produced the Minotaur. You know. Standard family issues. But right now, none of that has happened. Minos is still learning to hold a reed pen. His mother still braids his hair in the mornings. Sarpedon still throws olives at goats. Rhadamanthus is obsessed with beetles. They are just children. Europa gathers her robe around her shoulders and sits down in the grass. The night is warm. The stars begin to bloom overhead. What do you think they'll become? She asks. You lie back, arms folded under your head. Kings. Legends. Stories so tangled that no one remembers where they started. She looks over. And me? You pause. Then, all of it begins with you. She considers that for a moment. Then she smiles, a small, private smile meant only for the dark. You fall asleep to the sound of Talos' footsteps, Laylaps breathing softly at your feet, and Europa's voice, humming again, this time a lullaby not for babies, but for myths. You're jolted awake at dawn by the sound of shouting, panicked, high-pitched, and echoing through the corridors of the palace like someone kicked over a hive of startled priests. You stumble outside, rubbing your eyes, only to find an entire delegation of scribes and servants gathered at the eastern gates, pointing wildly toward the coast. At first you see nothing. Just the usual mist clinging to the lower hills, the sleepy flicker of early torches, and the faint glimmer of dew on stone. And then, with a slow and ominous thud, something massive turns the corner of the cliffs. Talos. Except this morning, he's not just pacing. He's chasing. You squint and make out the shape of a foreign boat bobbing just off the shore, a small, fast vessel clearly trying to escape back into open water. But it doesn't stand a chance. Talos lumbers through the shallows, the water barely reaching his knees, steam hissing from the bronze seals around his joints. With an almost theatrical inevitability, he picks up a boulder. Where did he even get a boulder? And flings it into the sea. The boat splinters like kindling. Europa appears beside you, still half-dressed in her nightrobe, a child clinging to each hand. She watches, unblinking. Who were they? You ask. Thieves. A voice answers from behind, a palace guard, panting. They came in the night. Tried to take the children. Or the gold. Or both. You look back at the shore just in time to see Talos scoop one of the would-be kidnappers from the surf and casually punt him into a rock. It's a little much. Europa exhales. I suppose that answers whether he's more watchdog or war machine. And now the bronze man returns, slow and steaming, back to his usual patrol route, as if nothing happened. Welcome to life with mythological bodyguards. Talos, it turns out, never sleeps. He circles Crete 3 times a day, scanning the seas with glowing eyes, responding only to Europa's command. The children love him. They wave from the palace roof and leave clay dolls along his path, which he carefully steps around. But the adults are more wary. You catch fishermen murmuring prayers when he passes. One priest insists Talos' footsteps are hollowing out the island like a pestle wearing down a mortar. Historians still argue whether Talos was purely myth or a distorted memory of ancient technology. Could he have been a mechanical effigy, used in ceremonial processions? Was the myth a garbled recollection of early war machines, siege towers, or metal armor clanking across a battlefield? Or perhaps he was always metaphor, a symbol of isolationism, of how Crete protected itself from outsiders not with armies, but with stories. Then there's Laylaps, who, unlike Talos, sleeps, just not for long. The dog seems to be everywhere at once. You see him leap from balconies, scale stairs, bark at shadows only he can see. He once chased a raven across 3 courtyards and up a palm tree in under a minute. No one in Crete even bothers with a city guard anymore. Between Laylaps and Talos, crime has dropped to roughly 0. Of course, there's one small hiccup. Laylaps is too good. The moment someone drops a fruit basket, sneezes suspiciously, or looks the wrong way at a goat, Laylaps launches into action. The dog once chased a fleeing mouse so aggressively it jumped into the sea and swam halfway to Rhodes. Local poets are now writing sonnets titled, Ode to the Rodent That Got Away. Probably exaggerated. Probably. And Europa? She manages all of it with weary grace. She installs new laws, simple ones, but just. She orders irrigation channels repaired and supports a weaving guild run entirely by widows. She holds audience every 7th day, sitting beneath a fig tree, sandals off, listening to petitions while her sons play in the dust. Minos is growing fast now. He's clever, demanding, and beginning to show the edges of a sharp political mind. Rhadamanthus prefers silence. He's started writing poetry, if you can believe it. Sarpedon is still a whirlwind with legs. You sit beside Europa on a warm evening, sipping spiced wine and watching Talos stride along the cliffs, his silhouette etched against a salmon-pink sunset. Zeus gave me more than I realized. she says softly. You glance at her. Not him, exactly, she continues. But consequence. Wait. The story didn't end when he left. That's the trick, isn't it? The gods start things. But mortals carry them. She pauses, then laughs. Or maybe I'm just trying to make all this make sense. She gestures toward the horizon. A mechanical man who crushes pirates. A dog who hunts the wind. A son who might build a labyrinth because he's too clever for his own good. Fringe tidbit? Some later authors, notably the Romans, believed Talos wasn't a gift from Zeus at all, but from Hephaestus. And that he ran not on divine power, but ichor, the golden fluid that flows in the veins of gods. Supposedly, that vein ran from his neck to his ankle, capped with a single bronze nail. Remove it, and the ichor flows out like oil from a cracked lamp. Not that anyone's brave enough to try. Europa finishes her wine and leans back. What do you think he'll be remembered for? She asks, watching Talos. Talos? You say. The crushing, mostly. No. She smirks. Minus. You think for a moment. He'll be remembered for the things built in his name. The laws. The justice. The labyrinth. She nods, not surprised. But not for me, she adds quietly. You shake your head. Not always. But sometimes. In small notes. In footnotes. In starlight. Europa smiles. It's enough. And so the days pass, sun-warmed, fig-sweet, full of shadow and steam. You live among ancient machinery, divine leftovers, and children who will someday become myths themselves. And all the while Talos walks. Lelaps runs. The gods remain silent. And Europa? She waits, not for Zeus, but for the world to catch up. The years begin to slide by like olive oil down a bronze bowl, quiet, glistening, and deceptively fast. You barely notice at first. A sprout becomes a sapling. A boy's voice cracks. A stone wall that was being built is suddenly part of the skyline. Crete grows with Europa. Markets expand. The port grows busier. Foreign dignitaries arrive bearing gifts and delicate flattery, hoping to secure trade routes or marriage alliances or just a few days of not being chased by a terrifying bronze automaton. Europa meets them all with polite smiles and diplomatic small talk, but you can see it in her eyes, she's tired. Not from age, she still moves with the same grace, but from the weight of maintaining a story that the world has already decided how to tell. Queen, mother, lover of Zeus. Those are the labels they expect. But Europa? She's something more complex. More layered. Something not meant to be reduced to a line on a scroll. Still, she plays her role. Her children are nearly grown now. Minos has taken to council meetings like a dolphin to water, assertive, brilliant, just a little too pleased with himself. Rhadamanthus now judges minor disputes in the southern provinces, writing poetry in the margins of court documents. And Sarpedon? He trains with the palace guards, has broken 3 swords in mock combat, and once fell off a roof trying to impress a shepherd boy. All completely normal for a son of Zeus. But Europa? She surprises everyone. One morning, she announces she's stepping back. Not fully retiring, she'll still advise, still offer guidance, but she wants a quieter life. Less palace. More hills. Fewer ceremonial parades. More walks by the sea. Minos, predictably, protests. Rhadamanthus bows respectfully. Sarpedon tries to talk her into moving into a treehouse he's built. You just shrug. It's about time. She doesn't leave the palace completely. Instead, she retreats to a seaside villa, a stone building shaded by fig trees and carved with dolphin motifs. Lelaps goes with her, though he still patrols the palace occasionally. Talos, ever faithful, adjusts his route to pass near her home every evening, pausing slightly longer when she's sitting outside with a cup of wine and a bowl of olives. There's peace in this semi-retirement. Time slows again. You spend mornings with her in the garden, harvesting herbs, weaving baskets, or feeding bits of barley bread to the goats. She laughs more now. She tells stories, not the ones about Zeus or her sons, but the ones from Tyre. Childhood tales. Songs sung by nursemaids. Gossip about Phoenician nobles with bad haircuts. You ask her once if she misses it. Tyre? She says, turning a sprig of thyme between her fingers. Sometimes. The purple dye. The smell of the harbor. My brothers! She trails off. You know what happened to her brothers. Cadmus wandered the world looking for her. Eventually, he founded Thebes. Became a myth in his own right. The others disappeared into the margins of legend. All because their sister vanished on the back of a bull. Europa sighs. But Crete gave me something else. A chance to grow into someone new. She pets Laelaps absent-mindedly. And here's where things get odd again. One morning, a visitor arrives, not a merchant or noble, but an old man with a face like dried leather and eyes like clear quartz. He claims to have been sent by Zeus. You nearly laugh. Sure, buddy, get in line. But Europa takes him seriously. She invites him in, offers bread and cheese, listens carefully. He tells her Zeus has sent one final gift. You both glance around, half expecting a flying horse to land or a harp to start singing by itself. But the man simply places a scroll in her hands, bows, and leaves. She opens it. Inside, a map. Or rather, a plan? A puzzle. She looks up. It's a riddle. And thus begins the next strange chapter in her life. Riddles, devices, and unexpected gifts. 1 week later, a cart arrives. It rolls up to the villa on its own. No horses, no driver. Just a smooth, wheeled platform bearing a covered object. When Europa lifts the cloth, she finds a marble box with 7 turning gears and an inscription. Turn the stars backward, and the answer will walk. She raises an eyebrow at you. He's bored. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek stories often mention self-propelled carts, golden tripods that walk themselves to banquets, and gears used in temples to animate statues. Most of these were mythical embellishments, of course, but devices like the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient analog computer used to predict eclipses, suggest that the Greeks did, in fact, tinker with astonishing mechanical inventions, blending science, myth, and mystery. Fringe tidbit? Some versions of Europa's myth say that she used a chariot drawn by metal bulls, gifts from Hephaestus, to travel across the island. Others hint that her wisdom extended beyond politics, that she dabbled in mathematics, astronomy, maybe even early mechanical engineering. You watch as Europa studies the gears. Her fingers turn them slowly. She mutters to herself in Phoenician, then Greek. And after a few moments, click! The box opens. Inside, a perfectly balanced bronze sphere. It rolls onto her palm and begins to glow. Message received, she whispers. You wait for it to levitate. Instead, it unfolds, small hinges opening like petals. Within, a tiny constellation carved in relief. Orion. A symbol, a whisper, maybe even a joke from Zeus. A final flare of divine mischief. Europa places it on the shelf beside her herbs. I think, she says, sipping her tea, he wants me to know he's watching. You smile. Do you want him to be? She considers it. Sometimes. The days stretch on. The riddle boxes arrive irregularly now, some empty, some mechanical marvels, one containing a tiny lyre that plays itself and won't stop playing the same 4 notes. She gives that one to Sarpedon, who loves it. No one else does. Historians still argue whether Europa maintained contact with Zeus. Some versions end their connection entirely after Crete. Others imagine secret visits, shared dreams, or divine gifts disguised as omens. But most agree, she no longer needed him. She had her island. Her sons. Her strange, buzzing machines. Her walks by the sea. And, increasingly, her own sense of peace. It's been a long time since you thought of Zeus as anything other than a dramatic footnote. Crete has become its own world now, buzzing, blooming, sprawling under Europa's steady hand and her son's restless ambition. The divine bull is gone, and with him, the thundercrack urgency of gods meddling in mortal lives. But Zeus, ever the mythological boomerang, always finds a way back. One afternoon Europa receives a letter. Not a scroll, not a carved riddle box, but an actual letter, handwritten in an oddly clean, angular script. No courier. No seal. It just appears on her desk, weighted with a smooth white stone that glows faintly under the light. You're there when she reads it. She frowns. He wants to talk. Of course he does. You sigh. When he's bored or guilty. Europa's mouth twists into a half-smile. Or both. The letter doesn't give a location. It gives a time, sunset. And a direction, west. So you follow her again, across golden hills, through the olive groves, past the boundary stones etched with glyphs no one can read anymore. Eventually, you arrive at a small cliff overlooking the sea. No shrine. No altar. Just the sound of waves and the wind threading through her hair. And then, bam! He's there. No fanfare. No lightning. Just appears, leaning against a cypress tree like a myth dressed as a man. He still looks as radiant as ever, but this time, less theatrical. No thunderbolts. No golden aura. Just a man who knows he's a god, and knows that she knows too. Europa, he says, almost softly. She doesn't move. Took you long enough. He smiles. You step back, giving them space. Sort of. You're still eavesdropping. This is your job, after all. They talk quietly at first, about the boys, the palace, Talos, the weather. Small talk between a god and a queen. Then it shifts. Zeus says, "You've made something beautiful here." Europa responds, "I didn't do it for you." There's no anger in her voice, just clarity. A truth that needs no permission. Zeus nods. "Still, you gave me something no one else ever has." She raises an eyebrow. "You mean an heir who didn't end in tragedy?" He chuckles. "That, and you told me no. You weren't there for their first encounter, not truly. But you've lived with the echo of it long enough to understand what she means now when she says, 'I never stopped being me.'" They fall silent for a long time. The sun dips lower. The sea begins to glitter with bronze reflections. And then, finally, Europa speaks again. "You've done this before. With others. Turned into animals. Birds. Gold. You show up. You dazzle. You disappear." She turns to him. "What made me different?" He doesn't answer right away. "Because," he finally says, "you didn't ask to be part of my story. You made me part of yours. And now you really need a nap, because that line was way too poetic for this time of day." Mainstream historical fact: Zeus was one of the most frequently reimagined gods in ancient literature. To the poets, he was a lover, a tyrant, a skyfather, a trickster. His relationships, often with mortal women, became central pillars of Greek storytelling. These weren't just romantic episodes. They were cosmological blueprints, used to explain dynasties, geography, morality. And each woman in those stories? Usually eclipsed. Reduced to scenery. A means to an end. Except Europa. Her story became a seed, planted and expanded until it bloomed into something bigger than even Zeus could control. She never returned to Phoenicia. She didn't beg to go back. She didn't wait for rescue. She built. Zeus shifts his weight. "I didn't come to reclaim you." "Good," she says. He looks at her like he might reach out, but he doesn't. Instead, he says something she never expected. "Thank you?" She nods once. "You're welcome." Then he vanishes, just like that. No thunderclap. No puff of smoke. Just a shift in the air, and he's gone. Europa exhales. Long and deep. You walk back with her in silence. Later that night, the boys ask where she went. "Nowhere special," she says. And here, because you can't help yourself, you begin to reflect. Zeus's romantic record is, to put it generously, chaotic. There was Io, whom he turned into a cow to hide from Hera. She wandered the earth, chased by a gadfly, and eventually ended up in Egypt, where her descendants founded dynasties. Leda, whom he visited as a swan. She gave birth to Helen of Troy and the Dioscuri twins, Polydeuces and Castor. Arguably, that seduction/bird disguise sparked the entire Trojan War. Good job, Zeus. Danae, whom he entered as Golden Rain. She bore Perseus, slayer of Medusa and future grandfather of Hercules. That particular rendezvous involved a tower, a locked room, and a heavy metaphor for divine intrusion. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect real ritual traditions, early myth-making attempts to justify royal lineages, or something darker, power imbalances turned into legend. But they all share a pattern: woman receives God, God leaves, consequences unfold. Europa's story was supposed to be the same. But she rewrote it. She didn't die tragically. She didn't vanish. She didn't get cursed or locked in a tower. She became something larger, an origin point. The root of Crete's most enduring legend. The mother of a mythic dynasty. The quiet force behind thrones and prophecies and, eventually, a continent. Fringe tidbit? Europa is sometimes listed among the few mortals given divine honors after death. Some ancient writers believed she became a goddess in her own right, a celestial figure watching over islands and sailors, sometimes associated with moonlight or tides. Others claimed she was buried near Gordon, beneath a grove of cypress trees where oracles bloom. You sit beside her again the next morning, watching the goats clamber over a sun-warmed hill. You don't miss him, you say. She shakes her head. I never had him. She picks up a piece of pottery, broken but beautifully glazed. But I did build something from it. And sometimes, that's what stories are for. It starts, as many strange things do in your life now, with a snail. You're in the market with Europa, haggling over a particularly fragrant basket of coriander, when she stops mid-sentence, picks up a spiral shell from a vendor's table, and says, "This one's Phoenician." The merchant, who is very clearly Cretan and very clearly offended, raises an eyebrow. "Ma'am, that's a local shell." Europa turns it over in her hand. "I grew up seeing these scraped for dye. The murex snail. You crack them, you find a gland that smells like seawater and regret, and after 1,000 of them, you get royal purple." You blink. "I thought we were buying herbs." She just shrugs. "I'm always buying stories." And that's how it begins, with one shell, one memory, and the tug of a homeland that she hasn't mentioned in years. She starts asking about traders. Specifically, Phoenician ones. Where they dock. What they bring. Whether any still use the old goddess coins stamped with crescent moons and palms. Because Europa is remembering who she was, before Crete, before bulls, before sons who argue about inheritance over breakfast. You spend the next week helping her build a new dye pit behind the villa. The smell is indescribable. Somewhere between burnt oysters and divine punishment. Laelaps refuses to come near it. Even Talos deters around the perimeter on his evening patrol. But Europa is energized. She rolls up her sleeves. She's talking about Tyrian glass, cedar from Lebanon, maritime contracts. You swear she smiles more now than she did during the entire process of raising Minos. She's not looking backward exactly. She's folding the past into the present. Mainstream historical fact: the Phoenicians were among the greatest seafarers and traders of the ancient world. Their city-states, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, spread influence across the Mediterranean. Their purple dye, made from the murex snail, was so expensive and labor-intensive that it became a symbol of elite status from Mesopotamia to Rome. The Greek word for the dye, porphyra, eventually gave us terms like born to the purple, reserved for royalty. And here in Crete, Europa is bringing it back. She hires local women to help, most of whom gag at the smell. But they learn. They adapt. She teaches them how to cut the shells just right, how to expose the gland, how to soak it, wait for the color to oxidize. The process is messy. The results? Brilliant. One day, a merchant from Egyptus sees a sample of cloth in the harbor market, deep purple, the kind of shade that looks like it costs several goats just to touch. He pays double what she asks. then triple. By month's end, Europa has restarted the purple trade. Again. You sit with her one evening, the stars sharp above, dye stains on her fingers. You could have just ruled and retired. She snorts. And let Minos think that the palace is the only place power lives? Because that's what this is, of course. Not just nostalgia. It's a reminder, to her sons, to the people, to the world, that power comes in many forms. Sometimes it wears a crown. Sometimes it wears an apron and smells like fermented mollusks. Rhadamanthus visits with a poem titled The Queen Who Paints in Snail Blood. She pretends to hate it. Keeps it tucked in her sleeve. Sarpedon asks if he can use the dye to make a flag for his personal army, which currently consists of 3 friends and a goat. She says yes. The goat immediately eats the prototype. And Minos? He starts to understand. He visits the workshop. He asks about supply lines. He orders a ceremonial robe dyed entirely in Tyrian purple and wears it for his next diplomatic audience. The message is clear: Crete does not just rule. Crete trades. Crete creates. And at the center of it? A woman who was once carried off by a bull, who now commands fleets by the color of her cloth. Fringe tidbit? Purple, in later centuries, became so synonymous with royalty that Roman emperors restricted its use by law. Only Caesar and his direct relatives could wear it fully. And it all started with the Phoenicians, with murex, with the hands of women and workers staining history one shell at a time. Europa's villa begins to smell like salt and pigment. Visitors come more often now, not just to pay respects, but to learn. Traders from as far as Cyprus and Mycenae arrive with questions. She shows them her methods. She charges appropriately. One afternoon, a sailor gives her a coin from Tyre, battered, ancient, barely legible. She holds it like a heartbeat. "They'll remember," she murmurs. "You mean the dye?" "No. The woman who carried it here." Historians still argue whether Europa's Phoenician origins were emphasized or obscured in later Greek retellings. Some scholars believe her roots were purposely minimized. Greek myth needed her to be the mother of Crete, not a proud daughter of Tyre. Others say her foreignness was the whole point. She symbolized the merging of cultures, the marriage of East and West. But in Europa's own hands, her identity was never either/or. It was and. Phoenician and Cretan. Mother and merchant. Myth and woman. She finishes the day with a swim in the sea, the last light turning the waves to amethyst. You sit on the rocks, watching her float effortlessly, hair trailing behind her like ink. You think about her journey, from girl to passenger to queen to quiet power behind a reborn trade empire. All from one snail. One story. One choice to stay. The past doesn't just follow her. She invites it to dinner and teaches it how to ferment fish. It starts with a carving. You're walking through the palace garden with Europa. She's balancing a basket of pomegranates on one hip and pretending she isn't in full control of everything within a 50-mile radius. When you pass a stone bench with a newly chiseled inscription. It's small, subtle, barely legible beneath the dust and vine tendrils. But you stop. Europa stops too. Squints at the worn letters. And there it is, half hidden in the dappled light. To Europa, mother of a continent. She raises an eyebrow. That's dramatic. You sit down. They're already naming things after you. She gives a tired little laugh. They should name a sea monster after me. Or a very patient goat. But the seed is planted. Because that's how names work in myths. They start as whispers, graffiti, throwaway lines, and then suddenly they're on maps. On temples. On the mouths of strangers who don't know the full story. Mainstream historical fact: the name, Europa, eventually came to designate not just a woman, not just a myth, but an entire continent. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, already uses Europe as a geographic term. Greek geographers divided the world into Europe, Asia, and Libya, Africa. But the myth? It lingered behind the label. A Phoenician girl taken west. A cultural symbol embedded in cartography. Over time, the origin blurred, but the name remained. Europa doesn't know all that yet. But she can feel it. A week later, a traveling sculptor arrives at the palace gates. He's young, hungry, and annoyingly poetic. He wants to carve a depiction of her. For posterity, he says, sketchbook flapping. On a coin, maybe, he adds. Or a temple wall. Something to last. Europa narrows her eyes. What does posterity want with me? He stammers something about symbolic lineage and pan-Hellenic resonance. You step in and say, maybe wait until she's had breakfast. Eventually, she agrees. The sculptor starts work, and his depiction spreads fast. He carves her riding the bull, graceful, serene, a robe rippling behind her like waves. But he adds a twist: above her head, stars. Beneath her feet, the curve of land, a suggestion of a map. A continent implied in the tilt of her posture. It catches on. The image becomes popular among the merchant class. They engrave it into amphorae. They paint it onto tiles. Some eccentric pottery merchant in Corinth even commissions a series of plates, each one a different stage of the bull ride, with Europa looking increasingly unimpressed. And then come the coins. Gold-dusted, palm-sized, warm from the mint. One side, a bull and a girl. The other, a cluster of stars and a name. Europa. She stares at the first one like it's some kind of prank. It's flattering, she says flatly. But it's a very small coin for a very large life. And yet it sticks. Soon, travelers from mainland Greece begin referring to Crete as the gateway to Europa. Sailors carve her name into ship hulls. Poets begin and end their epics with her name, even when the story has nothing to do with her. You read one awful one about a cucumber harvest that still managed to work in the phrase beneath the gaze of Europa. Fringe tidbit? Much later, the myth of Europa found new life in entirely unexpected places. In the 17th century, the name was affixed to one of Jupiter's moons, Europa, a glowing white satellite now known to possess vast underground oceans. Scientists speculate it may harbor alien life. Not bad for a girl who once clung to a bull's back across a choppy Mediterranean. Europa sits with you one night on the roof of the villa, coins in her lap, stars above. They see a symbol, she says. A name. A shape carved into bronze. They don't see the sand in my eyes. The bruises on my knees from the ride. The years of raising boys who think justice means yelling louder. You nod. That's what legends do. They file down the edges. She picks up a coin and flicks it into the air. It spins, catching the moonlight, and lands with a thud. Europa stares at it. They're going to forget what I sounded like. You don't answer. She already knows. Historians still argue how much of Europa's myth is Phoenician, how much Greek, and how much Roman rebranding. Each era reshaped her, sanded her rough edges, swapped out the smells of seaweed and dye vats for the scent of divinity. Even her children's stories changed. Sarpedon became a tragic war hero. Minos became either a wise judge or a vengeful tyrant. Rhadamanthus ended up in Hades, passing judgment on the dead with eerie calm. But Europa? She stayed frozen, always the girl on the bull. Not the woman who built an economy. Not the mother of 3 very noisy demigods. Not the retiree who grows thyme and dyes cloth in sea stink behind her house. One day, a group of sailors arrives from a northern port. They bow, present gifts, and say, "We came to pay tribute to the continent named for you." Europa raises an eyebrow. Does the continent know? They look confused. She smiles. Accepts the tribute. Sends them off with snacks and 3 amphorae of olive oil. Later, she confides in you. I don't need them to know me. I just want them to question the story. And that's where you begin to see the real ripple effect. A young girl in the harbor market starts carving spirals into clay tiles, says they're inspired by the queen who swam the sea. A weaver names her daughter Europa, not for the myth, but for the dye shop she built with her sister, where the walls are painted with dolphins and stars. A boy in the palace asks what it means to be named after someone who wasn't afraid to go. You see it now. The rebrand isn't something she did. It's something she allowed, with just enough truth laced into the embroidery to leave a question mark behind her name. Europa. Not just a myth. Not just a continent. A quiet echo tucked into geography. A name whispered when stories reach their edge and have to leap across the water. There's a weight to legacy you didn't notice before, not the kind made of stone statues or thick history scrolls, but the quiet gravity of staying in people's minds long after you're gone. And in Crete, Europa's legacy lingers like incense smoke caught in sunlight. It weaves through the palace halls, clings to the markets, hums in the space between a mother's lullaby and the sound of a ship setting sail. You notice it everywhere now. In the way people touch the coins with her image before handing them off. In the small offerings left beneath olive trees near the coast. In how girls learning to read now trace their fingers under the word Europa, like it's a star map. But you also start to notice something stranger, stories shifting, blending, pulling at their own edges. People begin to tell different versions of how she came here. Of who the bull was. Of what really happened. You're at a public gathering, an equinox celebration on the beach, when a traveling poet stands to recite his version of the great abduction of Europa. You lean forward curious. Always curious. Except, in this version, she's rescued by her brothers. Zeus drowns in a jealous rage. Crete never sees her. The bull turns into a storm and washes the island away. You glance at Europa, seated nearby, calmly peeling a fig. Do you want me to correct him? You whisper. She pops a seed into her mouth. Why bother? Because it's not true. She smiles. Exactly. She's not bitter. She understands something now, something even the poets haven't caught up to. That stories are less about accuracy and more about resonance. They don't have to be true. They just have to echo. Still, it's unsettling. Each retelling seems to stray further from the sand, the salt, the silence of that first ride across the sea. Historians still argue whether Herodotus, who wrote about Europa centuries after her myth bloomed, believed she was even real. He questioned the story entirely, suggesting it was propaganda, part of a back-and-forth justification between Greeks and Persians. According to him, the kidnapping of Europa was just one in a chain of retaliatory abductions, first Isle, then Europa, then Medea, then Helen. In that framing, she's not a goddess. Not a mother. Just a pawn in the world's earliest custody battle. But Herodotus never stood beside her on a cliff and watched Talos walk the perimeter of a sleeping island. He never saw her whisper to a child in Phoenician when they couldn't sleep. He never watched her face go blank with the scent of boiling dye, and say, "That smells like home." You wander the palace archives one day. Dusty scrolls, broken tablets, stacks of clay stamps. You notice something odd, a piece of bronze embedded in the stone floor, almost like a time capsule. Etched into it, in sharp Phoenician letters, is a single sentence. I chose to stay. You call her to see it. She stares at it for a long time. Then says, I'd forgotten I wrote that. You blink. You carved it into bronze. I meant to bury it, she says. Not for now. For later. Did you think they'd find it? I hoped. It's not the kind of inscription the bards will sing about. No thunder. No gods. Just a declaration of agency. A whispered refusal to be defined by someone else's decision. And it makes you think of how many other women in myth never got to write theirs. Fringe tidbit? In some versions of the Europa story, she becomes immortal. Not in the grand thunder and gold sense, but by quiet veneration. Some say the Greeks merged her identity with local goddesses. Others claim the Minoans carved figurines of her likeness and placed them at doorways to protect the home. She may have even become a local cult figure, a symbol of safe passage across the sea. The girl who once crossed it on a bull, now watching over sailors from the shoreline. Europa returns to her garden that afternoon. She tends her dye vats, cuts rosemary, braids a new rope leash for Laylaps, who is slowing down now, but still faster than most breezes. The boys are grown. Minos is taking more control each day. Sarpedon's leaving soon, he says, to find his fortune, to chase wars and stars. Rhadamanthus stays close but speaks less. He's watching the world unfold, trying to decide if he wants to help shape it or just write it down. You sit with Europa at dusk, and she tells you about a new dream. A coin, she says, floating through space. Not in the sea, space. Cold and silent. It has my face on one side, and stars on the other. You glance at her sideways. That's oddly specific. She shrugs. I've had weirder dreams. You smile. You're not going to tell her about the moon yet. The one circling Jupiter. The one scientists will name Europa. Covered in ice. Hiding oceans. A moon that might, just might, harbor life. No, that'll be your secret. For now. Because the story hasn't stopped. It never stops. She's no longer just the girl who rode the bull. No longer just the queen or the mother or the legend. She's become space for interpretation. A name people borrow when they need a symbol. A shape they see when they look across the sea and wonder who came before them. And the line between myth and memory? It's blurry now. Deliciously blurry. Because that's the magic of hoofprints across sand. They fade, but they linger. And some names, once carved into the world, never wash away. The sea is quiet tonight, glassy, moonlit, stretching to the horizon like a silk ribbon left untouched. You sit beside Europa on the low wall outside her villa. No festival, no announcement, no gods appearing from tree shadows. Just silence, and wind, and the creak of a fig tree that's been here longer than the roof tiles. She's old now. Not frail. Not diminished. But settled. The sharp edges of her youth, her need to prove, to push, to burn, have softened into something wider, deeper. A slow river rather than a crashing wave. Laelap sleeps at her feet, one ear twitching in his dreams. His coat is silver now, and he no longer outruns shadows, but he still follows her everywhere, quietly protective. Talos still patrols the coastline. Relentless. Eternal. His bronze form faintly visible across the bay as he glows with captured moonlight. He doesn't slow, doesn't change. He walks the same path he always has, like an echo that forgot where it started. Europa watches the horizon, knees pulled to her chest. Her fingers play with a loop of carved beads, tiny dolphins, stars, snails, and one bull. She doesn't speak for a long time. You don't press her. And finally, softly, she says, "They built a temple." You nod. You've heard. The locals raised it near the old olive grove, where her sons held their first council. It bears her name now. They burn sweet myrrh on festival days. They leave olive oil, purple cloth, small bull-shaped statues. They call me a goddess, she adds, the corner of her mouth quirking. But I still hate olives with the pit left in. You laugh gently. The sky is beginning to turn. Stars wheel overhead. The kind of ancient silence that makes you feel transparent settles over the island. You think about all the names she's had. All the versions of her story passed down in ship logs, in temple hymns, in kitchen gossip. Some call her abducted. Others call her chosen. Still others whisper she was the first to teach Crete to dream in color. Mainstream historical fact: coins bearing Europa's image have been found from ancient Greece through the Roman Empire and into the modern euro. She appears as a symbol of unity, of shared heritage, of roots that reach across cultures. Not just Greek. Not just Phoenician. Something older. Something that suggests, however dimly, a woman who lived, chose, changed. And today, she sits beside you with no crown, no ceremony, just a quiet breath and a calm certainty. "I've been thinking," she says, "about how much of me was story before I ever had a choice." You glance at her. "I was born into one," she continues. "Royal blood. Daughters don't get to not be symbols. Then the bull came, and I was a myth before I had a chance to decide if I believed in them." She shifts. "But here? With the die. The children. The sea. I think that part was mine." You nod. "And if the rest of the world never knows?" you ask. She smiles. "They'll guess. They'll argue. They'll rewrite. That's what stories do. But someone somewhere will wonder. Will ask what happened after the bull stopped running. She looks down at her beads. At the little bull. He didn't stop because he was tired, she says. He stopped because I let him. Fringe tidbit? A few fragments from lost plays suggest that in one version of the myth, Europa eventually outlives Eve and Talos. That she buries the great bronze guardian herself, somewhere beneath the cliffs, in a tomb made of storm-split rock. No songs were written about that version. But you like to imagine it. You look over at her now. The fireflies rising from the grass. The children groan. The legacy set. And still, she's watching the sea. I thought it would feel like an ending, she says. Does it? She shakes her head. Feels more like the tide pulling out before it comes rushing back. And so you sit with her. Just a little longer. While the island sleeps, and the myths ripple outward like rings in a still pool. Underscore 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 underscore. Let your breathing slow now. The waves are still gentle, curling softly against the shore. Europa rests finally. Not as a queen. Not as a name etched into maps. But as a woman who chose to stay, to build, to bloom far from where her story began. The palace is quiet tonight. No footsteps. No voices. Just the rhythmic lap of the tide and the low creak of olive branches swaying in the breeze. The fire in the courtyard has burned down to embers. You can still smell the rosemary from her hands, the salt on her skin, the memory of dye that once turned white cloth into royal purple. Talos walks his final circuit for the night. His footsteps echo against the cliffs like a lullaby for the island. Laelaps dreams at the foot of Europa's bed, ears twitching in time with the quiet drumbeat of the sea. And you? You drift now, with the wind. Past moonlit fig trees. Past the old dye vats and whispering reeds. Past the faint, humming memory of gods who watched from the clouds and shaped the earth in wild, impossible ways. Let it all fall away. Let the story blur, gently, at the edges. Let the hoofprints dissolve into sand. Europa sleeps. The world is quiet. You are safe. You are still. And the story, her story, will wait. Sweet dreams.